Okay, let's kick this off. Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take, complex information, sometimes a whole pile of it from different sources, and try to pull out what really matters, the stuff you need to know.
Right, cutting through the noise to get to the core of it.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into something, well, something that happened relatively quietly, but has huge strategic implications. We're focusing on a specific date, June 15th, 2025.
And it involves India, Pakistan, and perhaps surprisingly, water. Something we all take for granted, but used here as a serious strategic tool.
Yeah, the action even has a name, Operation Sindoor. That name itself, Sindoor, that red powder, it sort of hints at something powerful, something symbolic like commitment or control.
Definitely symbolic. And this wasn't your typical military move, no jets scrambling, no tanks rolling, at least not for the specific operation. It was about controlling flow, or maybe more accurately, stopping it.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, to unpack why. Why did controlling water turn out to be arguably a bigger deal in this context than a conventional military strike?
We need to look at the history, the specific event, the consequences.
And what it all means going forward, right?
Right.
Especially contrasting this sort of quiet leverage with the usual headlines about conflict.
Absolutely. To really get it, you have to start with the foundation. The Indus Waters Treaty, or IWT. It's crucial.
Right, that goes way back, signed in 1960, wasn't it?
Yeah, 1960. And the World Bank was involved, which is interesting. They helped broker it, trying to create some stability over these vital rivers between India and Pakistan.
Two countries with, let's say, a complicated relationship.
That's putting it mildly. And the treaty, it didn't just say share the water. It actually divided up the rivers, the Indus, Ravi, Sutlej, Bees.
But not an even split, from what I understand.
Not even close. Pakistan ended up with rights to the vast majority, around 80% of the total water flow in that system.
80%,
Yeah.
that's huge. And India, for decades, largely stuck to that agreement.
Pretty strictly, yes. That's a key point in the material we looked at. Even during major wars, serious conflicts, periods of really high tension.
Like allegations of cross-border terrorism support and things like that.
Exactly. Even with all that going on, the sources suggest India generally kept the water flowing as per the treaty. It's like the analogy used was like being a good neighbor sharing your Wi-Fi, even when the other guy keeps, throwing rocks at your window.
Okay, so that long history of sticking to the deal makes what happened on June 15th, 2025 stand out even more.
Precisely. That was the day India effectively suspended the flow of the Indus River waters towards Pakistan. A major, major decision.
But it wasn't done in secret either.
No, the announcement came earlier, May 11th, 2025, a very public affair in New Delhi. You had top military figures there, Lieutenant General Rajiv Ghai, Air Marshal A.K. Party, Vice Admiral N.M. Pramod, Major General S.S. Sharda.
Army, Air Force, Navy, the whole top brass, announcing not a military exercise, but a change in water policy.
It's quite the contrast, isn't it? While, as the sources note, a lot of public attention might have been on rumors or maybe even fake reports about military stuff.
The real strategic move was happening almost silently, with engineers and water infrastructure. Very deliberate.
Which brings us back to the core question, why water? What makes it so incredibly potent here?
Well, the dependence, right. Pakistan's reliance on the Indus Basin is just immense.
Overwhelmingly so. The figures suggest something like 90% of their agriculture depends on irrigation from that river system. 90%.
So if you cut off or even significantly reduce that water,
The impact is potentially catastrophic. It's not just about farmers having a bad year. You're talking about the real possibility of famine, mass unemployment radiating outwards, huge social disruption. It's like cutting off the oxygen supply to their economy.
and that's the strategic angle. Pakistan has a strong military, tanks, nukes, F-16s.
All very formidable, but what good are they against a lack of water? You can't shoot down a drought. You can't bomb a dry riverbed back into flow. Conventional power becomes almost irrelevant to this specific pressure point.
And India holds the cards geographically.
Exactly. India is the upper riparian state. Fancy term, but it just means they're upstream. The water flows through India first.
Like having control of the shower head before the water gets to the person standing under it.
A pretty good analogy, yeah. India has that inherent upstream leverage.
So how did they actually do it? It wasn't just turning off a single tap, presumably.
No, it involved serious engineering work. Redirecting the flow using existing infrastructure like dams and canals India had already built.
But maybe also new projects, tunnels, irrigation schemes.
The material suggests that too. which points towards this being a long-term play, not a spur-of-the-moment decision.
Something potentially years in the planning, building up that capacity, while maybe Pakistan's focus was elsewhere. Military buildup, internal politics.
That seems to be the implication from the analysis, yes. India quietly built the infrastructure capability over time.
Okay, so the water stream was flowing as usual.
Yeah.
What was Pakistan's immediate reaction?
Predictably, scrambling. They immediately went to international courts, a killing based on the Indus Waters Treaty.
The very treaty they were now invoking so strongly.
Right, seeking global intervention, trying to force India's hand through legal and diplomatic channels. It's like, the analogy was like a kid caught cheating suddenly lecturing everyone else on the rules of the game.
Or the neighbor who never returned your lawnmower suddenly preaching about property rights.
Exactly. The irony was pretty stark, as highlighted in the sources. Pakistan, which India alleges hadn't always respected treaty obligations or international norms regarding terrorism, was now demanding strict adherence to the IWT.
And India's position, implicitly at least, seemed to be questioning that obligation.
Yeah, basically asking, why should we be bound to supply this critical resource to a nation we accuse of actively undermining our security? It's a fundamental challenge to the premise of the treaty under those alleged circumstances.
Now, is this kind of thing, using water strategically, totally unique to India and Pakistan?
Oh, definitely not. We need to see this in a bigger picture. Water as a geopolitical tool is, unfortunately, becoming more common.
The sources mention China, right?
Yes, specifically China's actions on the Brahmaputra River, which they call the Yarlung Tsangpo. China is upstream from India on that river.
So China's building dams, controlling flow, potentially impacting India downstream.
That's the concern. It's like this complex game of hydraulic chess playing out across the region. India puts pressure on Pakistan via the Indus. China potentially holds leverage over India via the Brahmaputra.
It paints a worrying picture. The sources use phrases like South Asia being a powder keg with a very wet fuse.
A potent image, suggesting that future conflicts might not be fought over land or ideology alone, but over access to shrinking water resources. Water wars are a real possibility.
It's helpful, maybe, to compare Operation Sindoor to India's previous high-profile actions, the surgical strikes.
Good point. Remember 2016, after the Uri attack, Indian forces crossed the line of control, hit militant camps. Very kinetic.
Pakistan denied it happened, or downplayed it, but India pushed back with evidence.
Right. Then 2019, after Pulwama, the Balakot airstrike. Indian jets flying deep into Pakistan to bomb an alleged Jaish-e-Mohammed camp. Again, very visible, very military.
Those were loud actions, explosions, immediate headlines, military hardware in action.
Exactly. Operation Sindoor is the opposite. It's quiet, almost invisible in terms of immediate military spectacle, but the strategic impact, potentially far greater and more sustained.
Achieving a major effect without firing a shot, essentially, like winning an argument by just, walking away with the keys.
Or in this case, controlling the tap. And notice Pakistan's response options are different. They can appeal to courts, make diplomatic noise.
But they can't easily launch a military strike against an Indian dam without risking, unimaginable escalation.
Precisely. So their recourse is mainly diplomatic and legal, highlighting the asymmetric nature of this water leverage.
Beyond the courts, what were the immediate, tangible effects inside Pakistan after June 15th?
We saw some swift diplomatic fallout, suspending visas for Indians, kicking out diplomats.
Closing the Wagah border crossing, too, right? Very symbolic, like slamming the door after the valuable thing has already been taken.
And there was talk mentioned in the analysis of Pakistan threatening to abandon the Simla Agreement from 1972.
Which felt more like lashing out than a real counter-strategy.
That's how the analysis frames it, yeah. More reaction than effective action against the water issue itself. The real gut-level impact was hitting the farmers.
And the broader economy, food security.
Absolutely. With agriculture so dependent on that water, pulling the plug, even partially, is like pulling threads from a Jenga tower. It destabilizes everything. The potential for social unrest becomes very real.
While India, controlling the infrastructure upstream, is described as being in a relatively secure position regarding this specific issue.
So the world watches this unfold. How did the international community react? Any strong condemnations, interventions?
It seems mostly cautious. Mixed reactions, lots of raised eyebrows and nervous coughs, as one source put it.
So no one jumping in decisively.
Not really. The UN made statements about monitoring the situation, standard diplomatic language. The analysis kind of dismisses it as ineffective, like a paper towel in a monsoon.
And the major powers, the U.S., European countries,
Mostly calls for diplomatic solutions. Try not to pick sides too openly. They have complex relationships with both India and Pakistan. Taking a strong stance is tricky. But China must be watching very closely.
You'd have to assume so. Given their own upstream position on other major rivers, they'd be analyzing India's move, the global reaction, the effectiveness, learning lessons perhaps.
In Pakistan's appeals to international law, how effective can they be?
That's the hard reality. International law exists, the treaty exists, but enforcement is tough when one country physically controls the resource. It's one thing to have a legal right on paper, quite another to make the water actually flow if the upstream country refuses.
And social media blew up, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. The sources mention intense reactions on platforms like X, celebrations and nationalist pride in India, anger and anxiety in Pakistan. Lots of memes, too, apparently, visually capturing that idea of one side holding the tap, the other holding an empty bucket.
Okay, so looking ahead, this was a huge move by India. What are the risks involved for them now, and what are the big lessons here?
Well, one major risk is definitely China. If India uses water leverage against Pakistan, does that give China a green light or at least more justification to squeeze India harder on the Brahmaputra?
Escalating the hydraulic chess game, basically.
Exactly. It could raise the stakes significantly in that dimension. Who can divert the most? Water becomes a dangerous competition.
There's also the humanitarian angle, isn't there?
Absolutely. You can't ignore the impact on ordinary Pakistani people. Cutting off water, even framed strategically, affects civilians profoundly. Internationally, that can look bad, the perception of starving your neighbor. That carries reputational risk.
And even though a direct military response from Pakistan against the water cutoff seems unlikely or unwise.
There's always the risk of other forms of escalation, right? Pakistan has nuclear weapons, a history of using proxies, according to some reports. They might respond asymmetrically, stirring up trouble elsewhere. The risk of unintended consequences is always there.
But the biggest lesson, it seems, is about water itself.
Undeniably, water is now firmly established as a critical geopolitical resource. Forget just environmental debates. This is about power. It's the new oil, as the saying goes, maybe even more fundamental.
And rivers are the new pipelines, or maybe the new battlegrounds.
That seems to be the direction, especially with climate change making water scarcer and populations growing. Control over fresh water is becoming central to national security and strategy. South Asia is just one very stark example.
And internally for India, this signals a big shift, doesn't it?
A massive shift from decades of sticking to the IWT despite alleged provocations to this very assertive, almost aggressive use of leverage.
Reflecting maybe a broader change in foreign policy thinking. We've heard political statements, like from Home Minister Amit Shah, hinting at this tougher stance.
Exactly. It suggests the calculation has changed. India seems more willing now to use all the tools at its disposal, including control over shared resources, to respond to perceived threats. It's a message. The old rules might not apply anymore.
So Operation Sindoor, it's more than just one event. It feels like a potential game changer.
It really does. It shows how strategic goals can be pursued, how pressure can be applied without necessarily resorting to bombs and bullets. The quiet control of a vital resource can be incredibly powerful.
And right now, India holds that power, that upstream advantage.
For the moment, yes, they have the upper hand, quite literally the upper stream.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. Next time you turn on the tap, think about water not just as H2O, but as potential power.
Yeah, its role on the world stage is changing. It's not just life-giving. It's becoming a tool of leverage, a source of tension, maybe even conflict.
It leaves us with some big questions, doesn't it? What does this move really signal for the future? Will we see more resource weaponization like this? And how does the world even begin to deal with it when something as essential as water becomes a pawn in geopolitical games? Something to mull over. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.